alumni engagement at the School of Business with Stacy Owen. We love to offer webinars for our alums in the fall, and we are so happy to have the Legacy Center here to help us partner. They provide some awesome content. So we are going to be recording this session today, just making sure everybody knows that. We have some folks that won't be able to join us, and we love to be able to share the content so they can view it later. And I'm going to go ahead and let Pat Sweeney, our director of the Legacy Center for Leadership and Character, kick it off and introduce our speaker.
Okay, Carrie, thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to engage with you today and introduce our speaker today, Pete Watson. He's the executive affiliate of the Legacy Center for Leadership and Character. Prior to that, he was the executive chairman of the board of directors at Greif International. And prior to that, he was president and CEO of Greif International. Greif International is a $6.3 billion company, industrial packaging company, serving customers in 37 countries and has over 16,000 employees. So I can't think of a better leader who can talk to us about strategic alignment. So Pete, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
No, thank you, Pat, for the nice introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. And it's really encouraging to see so many Wake Forest alumni committed to continuous learning. I think that's one of the greatest attributes you can aspire to as a leader, is that continuous notion of improvement and self-learning. So good to have you with you, or good to be with you today. So as you know, the topic is how do you create strategic clarity in an organization? And we're going to discuss what it is, why it's important, how it aligns to success. After about 10 or 12 minutes, we're going to go to breakout sessions where you get a chance to connect with fellow alumni. We're going to have a couple questions for you to discuss, and then you're going to select a spokesperson in your group to come back to the full audience and share some of the summary of your conversation. It also will be a chance, if you have any questions at that time, you can ask in the group. And again, feel free, there's a chat message tool that you can use at the same time. So then at the end, we'll wrap it up and go forward. So Lynn, if you can go to the next slide, please. So when you discuss and engage in a strategic process, many people are tempted to go right to the exciting part of strategy, which is really about, where do you play? Where in the market do you participate in? And get into how you're going to win. And that's always an exciting part and an important element of it. But I think the first fundamental step in any strategy is you've got to define and create clarity for everyone in your entire organization. And it's really about who we are, what we stand for, why should I as an individual be a part of this organization? And then what do we aspire to become? And this really becomes the foundation and fundamental component of how do you unify an organization into a team. And I think it's really important in a strategy to connect the heart along with the mind, the passion with the intellect. And you need to paint a clear picture of the strategic direction you're heading that's simple to understand. It's common sense. It makes sense to everybody, and it can be unified across all levels of your organization. You have to ensure that everybody in your team can visualize how they fit into the puzzle and how they can personally contribute to the eventual strategy. So what I would tell you, I think it's a leader's responsibility, and you can argue it's one of the most important roles of a leader, to create, ensure there's strategic clarity across an organization. To use a rowing example, all oars need to be in the water rowing together at the same time to execute. And what this does is establishes a culture that becomes aligned with a strategic direction. And you can see here, I'm a big believer in simplicity. And I think when you talk about how do you create strategic clarity, it's really about three components: about a purpose It's the why. So it's why should we be here in this organization? What attracts us to this organization? And it's got to be more than a financial performance issue. It's not about how much money can I personally make? What's my bonus going to be? How much money as an organization can we make? Hitting certain EBITDA levels or cash flow. There's got to be a purpose that, again, connects the heart with the mind on why should I be part of this organization. Many of you in your own organizations have that why or the purpose. You can read a lot of literature about successful companies that have a purpose. I'll share one example. In Greif, the company I led and was with for 23 years, we're a global industrial packaging company, and our purpose was simply that we wanted to package and protect our customers' goods so they can serve essential needs to all people around the world. And that became incredibly important to all of our colleagues during the global pandemic, when things we took for granted, shipping essential needs, food, medicine, chemicals, all sorts of goods to the essential needs, was severely disruptive. So as we worked throughout the whole pandemic and we didn't miss a day of manufacturing production, that was a really important piece of pride and sense of purpose for all of our colleagues around the world. So again, you have to connect with the heart on why they should be part of your organization. The second part is vision. You got to make sure you give a clear direction of where we're heading as an organization that creates a unified path, that the strategy is aligned to the vision. Again, this is something that people can get a hold of and understand, hey, I can affect this vision. And again, you can read other companies' visions. You have a vision in your own company. In Greif, our vision was simply to be the best performing customer service company in the world. And that drove everything we did as a company. Every action, activity, strategy we did aligned to that vision. And that gave tremendous clarity, whether you're a truck driver, a forklift operator, a salesperson, a manufacturing supervisor, a leader. That was the vision we wanted to achieve. So everything we did as a company went toward aligning ourselves to achieving that vision. And again, you're in your own organizations and teams, and you have your own vision. And again, I think you get connecting the heart with the mind, a passion, with the intellectual side. And then if you have a purpose and a vision that's aligned, what that ends up doing is creating a culture. And all a culture is how does your team or how does your organization behave? And that drives the culture. And so your culture needs to be aligned, and the behaviors need to be aligned both with your purpose and vision. And the first step of any culture is really about core values and how you align those core values to the behaviors of your leaders, but also to all of the people in your organization. And let me give you an example. You've got to be very explicit about your values. There's a company that Bernie Madoff ran forever, and all of you know the story. They had core values, and those core values are about cheating, lying, and stealing from their customers so they could make money. If you remember the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, that fictitious company, I think it was Stratton Oakmont, they had core values. Their core values were steal, cheat, lie, and take the money of their customers. And they were very successful, both organizations short term. And then it all imploded because their core values destroyed the sustainability in their culture. And so what I would look to is, how do you create a culture based on core values in a business that is based on integrity and honesty and respect and trust of others, where you embrace diversity, where it doesn't divide you, it makes you stronger, or you have core values about the relentless pursuit of continuous improvement in everything you do. about how you create servant leadership to serve your colleagues and your customers. So that was the behavior and core values and culture that our company, Greif, had. And again, you can look at your own company, an own organization, and other organizations that you admire. And I promise you, you'll find a culture that is driven by behaviors on very strong core values that becomes a sustainable path to allowing you to execute on your strategy. And I will tell you, that is the leader's arguably most important job, is to create that purpose and vision and to ensure the culture or the behaviors of everyone in the organization's aligned. And that's a very easy thing to say and a very difficult task to achieve. But it's incredibly important. And Lynn, can we go to the next slide, please? And so why is clarity so important? You have a litany of stakeholders that you must align yourself with so they understand their role. And when you look at those 5 groups of stakeholders, they're all strategically at different parts of your organization. They contribute in different ways to your success, but all of them are very important and critical for you to achieve that success. You've got your own leadership team, which has to be lockstep and consistent in their approach. All your colleagues through all the levels have to clearly understand their role in the strategy and ensuring that it's clear enough for what they can do and how they can participate in the success. Your strategic customers need to be involved. Your strategic partners, it could be your banks, it could be your suppliers, it could be the communities that you live in. They should be all understand their role in it. And then obviously your owners and shareholders need to be part of it. And it's really important as a leader that you are the one that drives that communication and the clarity. So it means that instead of saying it one time and sending out a PowerPoint presentation, here's what's important, here's what we're trying to achieve, here's the clarity I expect. It doesn't work that way. You need to repeat this mantra over and over and over again to all these different stakeholders. And you need to do that in person, engage with them so they understand what their task and their vision and mission is. So it's, again, I probably spent a large percentage of my time traveling to all these stakeholders, repeating our strategy and ensure it's clear to everyone so they could all participate and be a part of this. So anyway, that's the first component. What I like to do now is to have you guys break out. And Lynn, if you can go to the next slide, please. We're going to break out, and there's questions on the breakout slide. I don't know if everybody can see that. The next slide. So Lynn is going to break you out in groups. You're going to discuss these three topics, and we'll have eight minutes plus or minus, depending how engaged you are. And then if you could select a spokesperson that'll summarize what your group talked about. And what I'd ask you to do is you can agree with some of the principles I talked about. If you want to add to it, that'd be wonderful. If you want to challenge what I talked about, that's great too. What we want to do is use your experience in your organization and others that you've had access to and discuss the importance of it. And then come back, we'll have a spokesperson talk and represent each of the groups. And then if you have any questions you want to ask as a group, that's a great time to do it. Use the chat box as well. And Lynn, I'll turn that over to you now. All right. Well, hope everybody had time to get a discussion. And why don't we start up with group one, and whoever the spokesperson is for group one, if you could tell us who you are and who you work for, and why don't you summarize what your discussions were in your group.
I think we were group one. So I'm Kent Griffin. I was an accounting major at Wake Forest, and I was in accounting, investment banking, and ultimately worked for a real estate company. And now I sit on corporate boards and not-for-profit boards. Our group, we didn't have time to get through all the questions, but we did have the opportunity to get through at least the first question for each of us, and everybody had some experience with this issue. And we had a couple of folks who, in particular, everybody had some sort of larger organizations, in some cases with a lot of people and a lot of organization components to it. So it seemed like a couple of folks had good experiences where the change management was going well. I think the area where the challenges came from related to where there were multiple cultural elements, or in a couple of cases where they were essentially roll-ups of lots of component organizations, and they had slightly different, or I wouldn't say competing cultures, but distinct cultures, and trying to meld those cultures together was a challenge for folks. That's kind of as far as we got in the discussion, but that is, I think, the theme of what came out of what we discussed.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Kent or his group? Either add to it or have questions for him? Well, Kent, you made a point. I think it's really important when you have a company built on acquisitions and you're trying to mold a variety of cultures into one. It's really challenging. And then when you have a global company, that the interpretation of culture can be a challenge. It's certainly important to address that. And our company was like that. So maybe at the end I can make some comments on that as well. So thanks for your notes. Second group, who is the spokesperson? If you could introduce yourself and give us your thoughts.
I'll jump in there for group number 2, and this is Will. So we kind of talked about it, I guess, not maybe at an enterprise level, but more at like a team level, particularly kind of in a communication world where maybe Slack is the norm and some other alternative communication channels and that type thing. They're very fast and easy and that type thing, but sometimes that's to the detriment of clarity, where you don't understand kind of how your partner is on workload and different things. So we kind of talked through some of those dynamics of just what that looks like at a team level versus maybe an enterprise level, and some of the challenges there, given the kind of new communication tools and realities post-COVID.
So Will, if I'm right, I think I saw that you're CEO of your company. So tell us, what are the challenges you see and how do you create clarity in your organization?
Yes, I mean, I'll just say for me right now, so I'm CEO of Bank of Tennessee, a $2 billion community bank from Nashville to the Tri-Cities where I'm in right now. I've been in the role for about 2 years, and we're actually rebooting our values and kind of re-rolling that out to the organization and following that with an updated kind of mission vision. And that's something that you don't undertake lightly, but a lot of our values were focused on external customers and not so much internal. So we've kind of revisited that to include some things about respect and inclusion and kind of the work environment that's more internally focused and that type thing. So we've kind of orchestrated a kind of a campaign to roll those out one by one. And then we've kind of got a overarching poster, if you will, type thing that kind of rolls all the values, that title slide that you had that kind of puts all that into one page that we can start making sure is visible everywhere. And then I plan to do a kind of a roadshow, as you were talking about, visiting with all the internal stakeholders to make sure that there's that clarity and that we have time to talk. And one thing that I found really powerful about the values thing is kind of like a core values speech, that you basically kind of go through each of those values and you kind of give examples of them being lived, or maybe examples where they weren't lived, kind of counter values and that type of thing, which I think helps increase clarity for what some of those values mean.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I'll tell you, when an organization rallies and aligns around core values, when someone behaves outside of those core values, whether it's your own colleague or your customer or supplier, it's really evident. Really what you want to get to is where people police and performance manage each other, because That's, when you have really great clarity is when you can have the masses, select or deselect people that either behave or don't behave according to the values that you want in your company. So that's a really good point. Any questions or comments for Will? How about group 3?
Yeah, sure. My name is Steve Norrit. I work for Husqvarna Group. So we discussed about the importance of cascading correctly the strategy down, and sometimes one of the challenge could be that it goes very well on a senior management level, upper management, mid management, but in the past, I work as managing a factory, for instance, and you really have to make sure you take time to communicate with production team and with the people in production line. And that's something that naturally does not come directly because they don't have access to all employee meetings or the same type of webinars or team meetings. So you have to make sure you pay attention to that. We talk also about the idea that if you over communicate, it also helps because everybody in the company is aware of the strategy, they're aware of where we're going, and it creates a purpose. It gives it makes the job more meaningful because you know why you're doing it, how is it impacting the progress of the company. So we feel that that was quite important. And then one last point that we are talking about is making sure that you get the buy-in. So if you have a strategy and you want to make sure that it moves forward, you need to find a way to explain it, but also make sure that you get the buy-in from the different stakeholders, because if they don't believe in it, it will be a very hard project to move forward. That's a little bit more the discussion we had.
Steve, so you talked about being a manufacturing site. How did you connect with the hearts and minds of your production colleagues? Because it might be very different tactics than doing that with salaried or white collar. So I'd be interested in your view on that.
I've covered different functions, so I'm not in the factory anymore. But what I used to do is to spend a lot of time in production line, directly connecting with the employee, making sure I know them a little bit on the personal side. You know their name, you know if they have families, and you connect with them, and you just take time to go say good morning and check on how they are doing. It was a challenging time because I did it mainly through 2 years with the COVID and making sure that everybody keep their job and everybody stay safe. But if you make sure that you're approachable and everybody can talk to you, call you by your first name, and they know you, then you also create the buy-in because then they believe in you. And when it's time to take a decision, we always took decision in a way that we are protecting the employee, explaining them why the company had to make some changes. But yeah, always putting first the employee and the culture of protecting them. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Any comments or questions for Steve or his group? How about group 4?
Hey everybody, I can speak on group 4. It was myself, Sam Cameron, and Shireen. So we talked a little bit about some examples of good clarity and bad clarity within our organizations, and we had fairly similar experiences. We both work for fairly large companies, so Shireen with Duke and myself with Cisco Systems at RTP, and there was kind of a couple of things that we talked about. I know in my organization specifically, when we've had good clarity, my company recently, I'd say recently in the past few years, we started implementing something called a V2 Mom, which is essentially, all the way up through our CEO. We have kind of this document that outlines, for this fiscal year, what do we want to accomplish? What does right look like? At the end of the year, what do we want to be able to look back and say we've accomplished? And so each of us takes turns filling it out. And one of the more important things that they stress is that, you should be looking at your leadership and aligning with their methods, right? And what that's done is it's helped us kind of figure out, okay, for my team, what is our piece of the puzzle? How does it align to the overall strategy or the mission? So that was something that I shared that was really impactful to my team. Was that since we started doing the V2 moms every year, we're able to kind of see what does our leadership want to do, and how do we fit into making that happen. And again, that goes all the way up the chain. We also kind of discussed situations or organizations that we've been in where clarity has been lacking. And again, Shireen and myself kind of had pretty similar experiences, but we have been in organizations too where it almost feels like you don't know what your piece of the pie is, right? And you don't, maybe you're passionate about what you do, maybe you like your job, you just don't really know how it fits in with the overall mission of the company. And so we kind of took turns discussing that as well. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Good, thank you, Sam. And anybody have any questions or comments for Sam or Shireen? Very good. Group 5 now. I think it's the last group, Lynn, is that right?
Yes.
Who is our fearless spokesperson for Group 5? Maybe you're on mute.
Hey, my name is Lloyd. I don't think we established a leader, but I'll jump out there for the team.
You are the leader then.
We did a lot of conversation around the overall vision being clear, and then how do you get that vision to vibrate throughout the organization? One of the team members spoke about having cards with the message of the vision printed out for all employees, and that the employees would carry around the card as kind of a constant reminder. And it's just that repetition of whatever the overall vision is, and making sure that you get that throughout the organization. We also pivoted and talked about the culture has to be right. Culture eats strategy for breakfast every single day. So you got to make sure that you have the culture correct and ready and ripe to receive whatever the message might be. It's kind of as far as we got.
Very good, Lloyd. That's great. I love that culture eats strategy every time. Hard to execute if you don't have a culture that's together, right?
There you go. Yes, sir.
Any questions for Lloyd or his team? So I've wrote a couple comments, and since we're together as a group, I think Kent, your group talked about in acquisitions or multicultural groups that you have trouble getting everybody aligned to a strategy and create clarity. I'd be interested if anybody on this group has seen that same thing in their companies, and then maybe what has been done to create that clarity when you have a multitude of groups coming together, because we've certainly had that experience in the company that I ran. Anybody want to comment? You guys are all shy. You're going to make me comment then, won't you? I think two points. So when you're talking about acquisitions, I think something that can be overlooked when you acquire a company is the culture. And I think it's really important. And Lloyd, you said it best, culture eats, strategy. If you buy a company that is extreme opposite of your company culturally, you're going to have a very difficult time integrating and creating synergies and becoming one team, because you're going to have opposing forces pulling on you. So I've seen two ways: companies that financially made a lot of sense to be acquired, but they are exact opposite cultures and they underachieved. And I saw some companies that acquired companies where the culture was a fit, and what it did is overachieved what they said they would do in all bases. So I think it's really important if you have an organization where you have competing cultures and anti-cultures, what happens is all the really good people won't stand for it. They want to be part of a team that's together. And so the risk is you lose all the good people from both teams. Mediocre people are willing to stay and put up with, competing cultures or bad cultures. Good, talented people are not. So I think that's a real risk, is acquiring. That's a big part of the process. How about cultures where you have international cultures? And we're talking about two different cultures. We're talking about, geographic cultures and language barriers and cultures, and try to create clarity to a synchronized organizational culture. Anybody have experience with that? Lloyd, I see you shaking your head. I'll call on you if you like.
Yes, sir. That's fine. Two short stories. One, the company I work for right now, Newark Electronics. We're a subsidiary of Avnet, which is a global company. There's quite a few parts of the business that's in Asia. And the things you need to be mindful of, again, from a U.S. perspective, it's almost seen as it's a good thing in business to be, aggressive and kind of straightforward with your message and kind of loud. Well, again, depending on who you're dealing with, especially if it may be people from the Asian culture, that's not a good thing to come out of, really abrasive and loud and kind of aggressive. So you need to kind of just be leery of some of the cultural norms before you go in, communicate, and try to negotiate, because you can kill something right from the start if you're not aware of that. Same thing also, I spent about 6 months in Liège, Belgium. I did an expatriate assignment there. And again, just knowing about the culture. No one told me about the double cheek kiss. They actually do a kiss on men, women, everybody kiss you as soon as you walk in. So I walked in, no one told me about that. And the man was trying to kiss me. Again, I was doing this, but that was his way of saying hello. Welcome, I'm happy that you're here. So just two small examples of you need to understand the culture, where you're going and what you're dealing with. It's going to help you facilitate any type of strategy or plans you might have.
Those are great examples, and you have to understand the cultures that are part of your team and how you behave efficiently to align everybody. Pat, I want to have you comment, because I know, in some of your classes you talk about this in the culture map. You want to make some comments to support what Loy said?
Oh, 100%, Pete. And one of the things is, if you want to look at the different cultural norms, the Globe study is a wonderful reference to it. And the key on that is, if you're leading people from different cultures, you got to adjust your leadership style to honor those important cultural norms, and understand how to navigate it, and what are the needs based on the culture. And then again, on the cultures communicate differently. Some people like direct communication, some like indirect. The other one is you got to look at the context. Some cultures are very high context, some are very low. United States is a very low context culture. We do not assume that we share understanding of norms in different aspects. So we tend to be very direct and very straightforward in our communications, and outline kind of, this is what we talked about, then summarize it and then close the loop. Other cultures, like Japan, is a very high context culture, and they assume a lot of things because it's very homogeneous. So in that culture, you've got to listen between the lines, what people say and what they mean. They may not come out and say it. It's what is meant by it based on the body language and everything else. So it's a lot more, I don't want to say difficult if you're coming from our culture, to kind of understand it in different aspects. And that's why it's important, if we're doing it, I would recommend organizations communicate at a level where you're assuming people don't have a common assumptions or understanding. And if you're coming from or working with a high context culture, let them know you're not being disrespectful, but this is a way to ensure everybody understands the message, everybody's aligned on it. But there is a lot of nuances when you're dealing with culture. And again, as a leader, we have to adjust to respect the people that we're going to lead in those different cultures.
And there's a book, if anybody's interested, it's a tremendous book, exactly what Pat was talking about, called The Culture Map, by a woman called Erin Meyer. And if you work in a multicultural global organization, it will open your eyes in a very positive way. And I think it'll help you in your communication styles to different colleagues around the world. And I would even tell you, in the United States, if you're a US based, you have to communicate style differently than the Northeast and the Southeast. In different parts of the world, we know, in the country, we know that. So the key is the message needs to be consistent. How you communicate that to reach the different understanding capabilities of people is really important, and you have to put a lot of thought into that. You can't communicate just one homogeneous way and think everybody's going to understand. I have one more question. So, Will, I know you're a president CEO, so I'll only ask you if no one else volunteers, but anybody else who is in a leadership position, the question is, you have a culture that's misaligned, or a group that just refuses to get in step and practice and behave in the manner that aligns to your strategy. So as a leader, what do you do? What are the actions you take to make sure that you get alignment? So is there anybody, before I call on Will, is there anybody else that would like to comment on what they've seen happen or what you think needs to be done to ensure that you bring people outside of the boundaries inside of the alignment?
I'll answer. This is Shireen.
Thanks, Shireen.
Hey, Shireen with Duke Energy, and I just graduated from School of Business this past January. What I've seen in the past is slowing down, stopping, and listening. Listening, starting with leaders to understand what is it? What's going on? Is it a misunderstanding? Is it just a belief that perhaps that organization or that leader knows something that the rest of us don't? But then also getting a chance to listen in some form or fashion to the broader organization. And then once you diagnose and understand what are some of those root causes, how can you go about addressing them to try to remove barriers to get buy-in? And of course, if none of that works, you also have another alternative, but try not to go there if you don't have to.
Very good, Shireen. Anybody else want to add to what she said or your own experiences? Kyle, I thought I saw you reaching to take the mute button off. Is that right, or am I just imagining that?
You're just imagining, but I thought Shireen gave a good overview there. I was gonna if I was chiming in, I would have said something similar where I think there's usually a story behind the behavior or the lack of alignment that's going on, and so however you need to figure out what that is and why that misalignment is there, like take the time to go do it. It's probably better to do that in a smaller group setting. If it's an individual, if it's a team, probably start with their leader and go that route. But always an opportunity to dig in further. There's always a reason behind the action, and if you don't know that reason, definitely want to spend the time to figure that out before making assumptions and trying to just bulldoze in that scenario.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Erica, since I see on the screen, I'm going to ask you a question. So in an organization, when you see alignment in a group or people that just refuse to get a step in line, what does that make you feel like as a really high contributor in your organization? And what do you think the masses are thinking to the leaders to help us understand that mentality?
Right. I think that they feel discouraged, and if the leaders don't take it seriously, like I think that, it can be insidious throughout the organization. So you've got to get on top of it, and you've got to take, whatever this issue is seriously, because otherwise it can magnify and start to impact, your better performers, and then morale starts to shift.
And what happens? Some of your best people decide, hey, this isn't an
Right.
organization I want to be a part of.
Right, because it seems like leadership doesn't care. You start to lose confidence in the leadership that they're not addressing it. It's a really big deal.
No, thanks for your comments. So Will, I'll ask you to tie a bow around it, because that's one of your jobs, and tell us about how you put an emphasis on that and the importance of it, and what you do to try to get your organization aligned. If you have somebody that just is not in bounds.
Yeah, and I'll say just with growth, sometimes your company reaches a plateau where maybe what was working to give the vision, to reinforce the values worked at one time or one level or one atmosphere doesn't work anymore. And that's kind of where we found ourselves geographically dispersed, not in the same spot from a leadership team down to the offices, that it was a good time to reboot and drive that strategic clarity. And I'd say that the thing that I'm probably struggling with more than anything, and talking with some other business leaders recently, I think they were kind of expressing the same thing, is when you set that stage for values or that expectation culturally, and you have a high performer that doesn't want to go along with that, how much rope do you give that person before it kind of undercuts what you're trying to build and create culturally and from a values perspective? And I don't know if there's one magic answer, but It is an interesting question that, personally, I think that ultimately at the end of the day, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And if you give someone that free pass, that's kind of the expectation that you set for everyone.
Yeah, you create silent chaos that becomes verbal chaos. And I think when we talked early on, making sure there's really clearly stated core values of what your expectation of the value system in your company, I think creates clarity on that. It helps you with that decision. And so I think really making sure that's inclusive and complete helps you making decisions on that. And Will brings one more point. So Lynn, I don't want you to go to the next page, but all of you will get this, I think, afterwards. But the third page talks about alignment of clarity and success. We've all talked about, hey, clarity drives behaviors and execution. We all talked about that. All of you did. You need a scorecard on leading indicators to measure your progress. But I think the big point, and Will talked about it, was, the importance of change agility. The world changes around all the time. Markets and competing markets and competitors change. You need to innovate and change what you do to have a chance to grow and be successful in the future. So it's the wisdom to understand the importance of when you need to change and how fast and agile you can act inside a company with an eye on the market. And I think Will talked about it best, is you need to get inputs from a variety of people to get a clear view of, is change necessary and how agile can you move the organization? Because there's nothing wrong with changing strategic direction and adding or changing some of the values. What you have to do is make sure that you are aligned to be successful in the markets you pursue. And I think Will brings a good point, is making sure you get input from all your stakeholders and constituents to ensure that your current strategy is relevant, not only clear, but relevant to being successful. So I've got 12:54 on my computer. I don't know if there's anybody that wants to make any comments or questions to me about this topic or anything. I'd be really happy to engage. I'm also free to stay on afterwards as long as someone wants to be. You just tell me and I'll be happy to do that. I see we got one question in the chat box. Lynn, is that for this, or is this an old one?
Hey, Pete, I got a question. You just talked about how do you know when you need to pivot from your strategy? And once you pivot, how do you realign? You just talked about a process that seems to be very time consuming to get people aligned on the original strategy. But now you're saying that if the market changed, we got to pivot. So how do we quickly communicate that to all levels of the organization and get everybody realigned on the new direction?
Yeah, I think as a leader, you've got to be really attuned to the markets you participate in and determine, are you positioned well in the market to win? It's the old adage, where do you play and how do you win? And you always have to do a litmus test. So I think it's really important to always evaluate your strategy every year, do a refresh, and get input from all your stakeholders, because everybody has a different view. And, it's an old adage, if you always do what you always done, you're always going to get what you get. And that may not be good enough. So I think a process in which you're getting feedback and refreshing and reviewing the strategy from your purpose, your vision, your core values, and then the specific business and market strategies you're employing, I think is really important. And then you have to be humble enough to say what we're doing can be done a different way, better to be successful. And that needs a collaboration of a variety of those constituents in your organization and customers and supply partners, et cetera, to evaluate it. So we had a formal 3-year strategy refresh complete. And then we also did every year we'd review the strategy. Are we doing the right thing? Is there anything we can add to it? And so we evolved as we learned. And the nice thing about that is it exposes future leaders in your organization, and gives you a chance to develop leaders as part of that process. So that's what we did. And
Thank you. I appreciate it.
A minute.
Yes, sir. I got all
Peter,
the time.
I'd love to hear any thoughts around getting alignment cross generationally. So I work at CarMax. We have, I think we just had a training, so we have members from all 5 living generations at the moment who are in the workforce, and so knowing that there's different kind of views on the world and the workplace and what strategy should be for companies. Any thoughts or tips on creating alignment where you might have a team that has 3 or 4 generations in it who kind of bring different viewpoints to work?
That's a great point. And Pat Sweeney talked about the culture map, and hey, how do you understand and communicate with all levels, geographical cultures, but you have generation cultures that are important too. And I think you got to study and learn and spend time with different generations to get a full context of your team, right? Because if you can't connect with all levels of your organization, then you're probably not going to get alignment and a together team. So I think is understanding that, hey, you may be old school and not know the answers, and you got to get input. Ultimately, you have to make the decision which you think is the best for your organization. But a great example is remote work, right? We all worked remotely during the global pandemic out of necessity, and it worked very, very well. Most people want to continue to work remotely, and I see most of you are in some type of remote environment. What is the right answer? I would tell you each generation probably has a very distinct and different view on what the right answer is. So if I was the CEO, I would be spending a lot of time with those different generations to get the input and really understand before you make a decision. It's too easy as a CEO or a leader to say, no, we're all coming back. I need to see everybody. I get and can understand the reason why you need collaboration person to person. But I think you also have to understand that to be attractive as an employer and a team, you may have to do things slightly different than maybe the quote old school. So I think that's a great example of it. And I think it's as easy as communicating, keeping open lines of communication and getting input from everybody before you make decisions. I don't know, anybody have any thoughts or opinions on that?
I'll add to it. I guess the way I've kind of covered it is you got to get to know the person, and I adjust my messaging. Now, if you're talking to them all at once, it gets a little tricky, right? But you kind of know as you position things how it's going to land with certain people, and you try and shoot down that middle. But by getting to know them and getting to know, call it the different subcultures that you're working with, I've definitely trying to have that. I guess empathy is my word of the day. I used in our group session earlier, right? Like try to understand it from their perspective, try to look at it from their shoes, know that where their angles or where their hot buttons are, where their focal points are, and it's going to vary by person to person. So I would echo that. It's not easy. So definitely don't have a high batting average, but it's a decent one.
Yeah, a good scorecard we use as a leading indicator for our culture and alignment is we use Gallup, and everybody knows who Gallup is. They're poll specialists, but they're also outstanding consultants in employee engagement and human engagement. We use them. I don't know if anybody's used them or been involved with them, but they are a great tool to determine within small teams in your organization how engaged are they, and it's a good indicator of alignment and clarity, and you get incredibly good and deep feedback on that topic. And when you have a significant number of people that are disengaged or not engaged, it's a pretty good indicator maybe your messaging and your culture and your values aren't aligned. And then it gives you an opportunity to address it. So we talk about scorecards on leading indicators. To me, I would recommend, if you haven't done it, to understand and learn a little bit more about those engagement polls and what Gallup does.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and dive in and say that thank you so much to Pete and the Legacy Center for Leadership and Character for today. I know in the interest of time, probably people need to run to their next meetings. So I want to go ahead and wrap up and appreciate all the alums on the call. And I will follow up by sending out a survey and also a copy of this recording in case you would like to take a peek. Anything
And I
else? Any
appreciate your
questions?
time and thank you for your participation. If anybody wants to stay on the line, I'll stay on as long as you need to. Thank you.